How many disasters in human history begin with exactly 4 words? Not a warning, not a plan, just 4 words, spoken with total, unshakable confidence, right before physics disagrees. Midway through, good to see you, because these 12 real files all start the same way. It'll be fine. Case 1. The passenger mower. This one feels small until you say it out loud the right way. A riding mower is not a passenger vehicle, people know that. Then summer comes, a grandchild climbs up, everyone smiles, and the rule gets quietly downgraded into something that sounds overprotective. In 2025, in Texas, 17-year-old Camarion Lay died after riding on a mower with a family member and falling into the danger zone where the blades and body of the machine could do what they were always capable of doing. Public reporting after the incident confirmed the basic mechanism. Mower, extra rider, fall, fatal outcome. That is the whole script of these tragedies nationwide. The mower feels slow enough to be safe. The ride feels short enough to be fine. The child or teen feels balanced enough to hold on. The operator has done it before, and each of those feelings is worthless against the actual design of the machine. Riding mowers are built around one seated operator. 1. The center of gravity, steering response, foot placement, blade shielding, and stability assumptions all belong to that single-person design. Add a rider and you create a human variable. The machine was never built to forgive. One bounce, one turn, one shift in weight, one attempt to adjust position, and the passenger is no longer a passenger. They are now in relation to rotating blades, exposed tires, and hard ground. Camarion Lay's death is the kind of case safety agencies plead about every single summer because it feels so preventable it almost becomes unbearable. Consumer product warnings, agricultural extensions, sheriff's offices, and local stations repeat the same phrase again and again: no extra riders. Not because it sounds good on a brochure, because enough dead children and teens have already proven what the machine does when people ignore that rule. This is why the case belongs near the beginning. It is not exotic. It is ordinary in the worst way. An ordinary machine, an ordinary family setting, an ordinary moment of trust. Then the machine's ordinary danger wins. Keep your attention here. The next file is colder. Case 2. The ice that held yesterday. Frozen water lies in a very specific voice. It does not roar. It does not flash. It does not throw warning lights across the surface. It just keeps looking solid until the second it stops carrying weight. And by the time the body understands the difference between appearance and structure, the lake has already taken over the conversation. That is why early season ice kills people who do not feel reckless at all. They are not all thrill seekers. Many of them are ordinary men following a route that felt safe yesterday, or a path someone else crossed last week, or a section of lake that usually locks up first. The problem is that ice does not inherit yesterday's truth. Wind changes it. Snow cover changes it. Current underneath changes it. Shoreline depth changes it. So the brain walks onto a surface using old confidence while the surface itself has already changed its terms. That is what made the Island Lake fatality so hard to hear. Jonathan Brake went onto the ice during the early winter period in Michigan and did not come back off it alive. Rescue efforts later turned into recovery. The scene was not cinematic in the way people imagine. That's part of the ugliness. It was simply cold enough to look trustworthy and unstable enough to kill. And once a body goes through, almost everything turns against it at once. The shock hits first. Then the breathing changes. Then the limbs stop obeying the mind the way they did on shore. Even shallow water becomes deadly because the problem is not only depth. It is cold, panic, soaked clothing, broken footing under the opening, and the simple fact that the person is now fighting a surface that keeps breaking away where it needs to hold. People here fell through the ice so often that it starts sounding like a seasonal phrase instead of a fatal mechanism. But every one of those cases is the same lesson delivered with a different name. The ice that held yesterday has no legal obligation to hold today. That is why DNR guidelines matter only if they are current, local, and actually checked before stepping out. Thickness is not folklore. It is a measurement. And a measurement from yesterday is often just nostalgia in numbers. Jonathan Brake did not die because water is dramatic. He died because frozen water looks finished before it is finished, and human beings keep trusting the look. Case 3. The wrong switch. This one is the worst kind of electrical death because the worker believed he had already done the safe thing. Brian Hansen was 50 when he died at the Stillwater mine in Montana in July 2025 while performing preventive maintenance on a transformer. He locked out a switch. He followed the altered instruction he had been given. Then he entered the equipment and contacted a live high-voltage circuit anyway. The fatal problem was invisible but devastatingly simple. He had locked out the wrong switch. That single error should terrify anyone who works around energized systems because it proves how meaningless ritual becomes when labels, instructions, and identification are wrong. Hansen did not swagger into the cabinet with no procedure at all. He trusted procedure. He trusted that the switch he was securing actually controlled the transformer in front of him. Mine investigators later said the relevant switch had not been labeled clearly enough to show which transformer it served, and task instruction around the modified maintenance method was inadequate. So the physical lock was there. The belief was there. Safety was not. This is why experienced electrical workers repeat the same ugly prayer. Trust the meter, not the memory. Trust the verified energy state, not the label, not the map in your head, not of the assumption that this must be the one. Because a wrong isolation point turns the whole ceremony of lockout into theater. And theater does nothing at 13,200 volts. Hansen died because the system around him allowed a lie to wear the costume of safety. There is almost no harsher way to die at work. He was not being dramatic. He was doing maintenance. That's what makes the file so devastating. Everyone wants to imagine the fatal electrical mistake as obvious from a distance. Sparks, stupid heroics, bare wires in the rain. Sometimes it is quieter. A man hangs a lock exactly where he thinks he should, and the equipment is still alive behind the panel. That is not just a worker failure. That is a system failure. And once the current finds the body, no one gets to argue about definitions afterward. Case 4. The homemade body armor. It always begins with someone wanting proof, not actual proof in the scientific sense, measured, tested, controlled proof. Just the kind of proof that can be performed in a yard with friends nearby and a camera somewhere in the scene. In a Sacramento area case from 2015, 19-year-old Miguel Henry Martinez died after a friend, Elijah Ray Lambert, shot him while they were testing a bulletproof vest. Reports said the group had been playing around with the vest and a gun near a bike trail area. One shot, one bad idea, one dead teenager. This case is useful because it destroys 3 lies at once. First, bulletproof is not a magic word. Second, old or informal gear is not trust. Third, a body is not a test medium. Even if the vest had some real ballistic capability, nothing about an improvised live fire demonstration with teenagers and a handgun qualifies as controlled testing. Coverage matters. Caliber matters. Angle matters. Condition of the vest matters. Shot placement matters. The actual rating matters. And in this case, none of those questions seem to have outweighed the emotional logic of young men wanting to turn uncertainty into spectacle. That is how people die around protective gear. Not because the gear is always worthless, because the word protection makes them forget the rest of the sentence. A vest protects under conditions it was built for. Everything outside those conditions belongs to chance. Miguel Martinez did not need the vest to fail dramatically for the case to become fatal. He only needed the assumption around it to be stronger than the discipline. And once the gun came out, the assumption was already in control. A lot of viewers hear stories like this and focus immediately on the shooter. He deserves scrutiny, obviously. But the darker lesson is broader. Adolescents and young adults routinely test danger the wrong way because they think touching it proves courage. It doesn't. It proves only that the weapon was real first and the confidence was real second. Miguel died because of the room treated armor like a dare instead of equipment. And once that happened, the shot was almost inevitable. Case 5. The quiet new guy. Some deaths feel especially unfair because the victim had barely arrived. Ian Atkinson was 20 years old when he died in a grain bin incident in Ashland County, Ohio in 2026. Reports around the case described the broad fact. A young man trapped in grain, emergency crews responding, recovery rather than rescue becoming the reality before anyone wanted to admit it. Youth changes the emotional weight of these incidents because people instinctively assume young workers are protected by time. There's a feeling that even if they make dumb choices now, life will still give them years to outgrow them. But industrial environments do not age-gradate their consequences. Grain does not care whether the body is 20 or 70. It only cares whether the body is standing in the wrong place when the material shifts. What makes a case like Ian's so brutal is that young workers often inherit the habits of the people around them. If a crew treats bins casually, the youngest person in the area learns casualness. If no one dramatizes the danger, the silence itself becomes instruction. The new worker thinks, this must be normal because everybody here acts like it is. That is how fatal culture reproduces itself. Not through speeches, through tone. By the time a young man climbs where an older worker climbed yesterday, the risk has already been pre-approved socially. He may not even feel like he is making a dramatic choice. He may feel like he is simply doing the task the way the place does it. Ian Atkinson's death belongs beside cases like it for exactly that reason. Same environment, same broad mechanism, different age, same silence. The bin didn't care that he had his whole life ahead of him. The grain didn't care that the county would later speak his name with a kind of heartbreak usually reserved for car crashes and sudden illness. It only did what unstable grain always does when a human being steps where the warning says not to step. And that's one of the ugliest truths in rural work. A young body can inherit an old mistake without ever being formally taught it. If the rhythm of these cases is starting to feel the same, that's because the mistake is the same. People trade one boring safety step for a little time, a little comfort, or a little pride. That trade almost never looks serious enough until the body is already paying for it. Case 6. The Grain Old Man. Grain kills by pretending to be solid. That sentence sounds poetic until you understand how often it becomes a coroner's explanation. In a 2026 grain bin fatality in Iowa, involving an older man in his 70s, responders recovered a body from a scene that agriculture safety officers already knew too well before they even arrived. A bin, an entry, moving grain or unstable crust, a worker alone or effectively alone, and then silence where a man had been a minute earlier. Older farm workers often die this way, not because they are careless novices, but because they have spent a lifetime around the same structures without enough consequences to keep the danger emotionally sharp. They have entered bins before, broken crust before, managed augers, clumps, wet grain, and sidewall buildup before. The work feels intimate, practical, and fully owned. That is the trap. A grain bin is not a room. It is a flow system. If grain is bridged or moving, the surface can collapse underfoot and the body is swallowed into material that behaves like a funnel. Once you are trapped past the knees, self-rescue becomes difficult. Past the waist, it becomes fantasy. The pressure on the chest is often what kills first, long before the grain reaches the head. The older victim in this file belonged to the demographic that rural safety educators worry about most. Experienced enough to enter without drama, old enough that a rescue window is even narrower, familiar enough with the work to ignore or minimize procedural barriers. That is why these cases feel so repetitive and so awful. Agricultural confined space rules exist. Lockout exists. External observers exist. Harnesses exist. But grain bin deaths keep happening because farms are workplaces where urgency and habit talk louder than signage. And age doesn't rescue anybody from moving grain. In some ways, it makes the risk more intimate. The worker thinks, I know this bin. I know this crop. I know this smell. I've done this my whole life. The bin answers by proving that history with a hazard is not the same thing as mastery over it. He died not because the farm was mysterious, but because it was too familiar. Case 7. The Academy's Last Drill. Training deaths frighten professionals more than ordinary accidents do. Because if a person dies in the place built to make him safer, then the whole profession has to ask harder questions. In 2023, a probationary firefighter recruit died during SCB confidence training at a fire academy in New York. The public reporting and official summaries made the broad outline painfully clear. The recruit was inside a self-contained breathing apparatus maze drill, the kind of controlled, supervised exercise designed to teach firefighters how to trust the air supply and function in disorienting conditions, when he suffered the fatal event that ended his life. This wasn't a burning collapse. It wasn't a real structure fire. It was training. That is what gives the file its emotional weight. Confidence mazes and SCBA drills are physically demanding by design. They push breathing, control, composure, and endurance inside a low-visibility environment that mimics panic without becoming real danger. But the body does not always respect the difference between simulated emergency and real stress. If health screening is missed, warning signs are downgraded, intensity is misjudged, or distress goes recognized a little too late, the training ground stops being educational and becomes final. The academy is supposed to be the place where mistakes are survivable. That is the social contract around it. Instructors oversee, medics plan, evolutions are structured. Safety officers exist because no one wants training to collect a body. When it does, the whole profession feels indicted. The recruit who died that day had entered the academy because he wanted to become the person people call in catastrophe. Instead, catastrophe found him in the practice version. This was preventable in the broad sense that all training deaths are through stricter screening, better medical awareness, closer monitoring, improved emergency readiness, and a culture willing to stop a drill before pride turns into collapse. But inside the evolution itself, the fatal mechanism often looks deceptively ordinary. Heavy breathing, stress, a delayed response. A person trying to push through what he thinks is just temporary discomfort because quitting feels weak in front of peers. That may be the darkest lesson in the whole file. The same identity traits that make people good recruits, toughness, perseverance, refusal to quit too early, can become lethal if the system around them confuses courage with safe continuation. He died while learning how to survive fire. That contradiction should disturb anyone who hears it. Case 8. The Provolution. The propane tank did not need to explode in a cinematic way to become fatal. It only needed to fail at the wrong moment in the wrong environment. Trevor Brown was a firefighter in Virginia who responded to a 2024 call involving a propane-related explosion and fire at a property in Sterling. He was not some bystander wandering too close to danger. He was the person trained to move toward it when everyone else is running away. That makes this file heavier, because it means the victim was already operating from duty, not ego. Yet even professionals are only as safe as the condition of the scene they are sent into. Reports and later official summaries described a catastrophic event tied to propane, an environment where one compromised tank or vapor cloud can turn an ordinary-looking structure into a waiting blast zone. Once propane escapes and finds the right mixture with air, the room stops behaving like a room and starts behaving like a container for violence. Firefighters know this. That's part of what makes propane emergencies so tense. The visible flame is not the whole incident. The invisible gas, the heated container, the potential for delayed detonation, those are often the real threat. Brown entered that world because it was his job. Then the scene escalated. What belongs in this script is not a cheap reading that he should have known better. He did know better. That's why his case lands differently from the others. It shows that sometimes fatal overconfidence is not in the victim alone, but in the chain around him. In the maintenance that did not happen. The hazard that had been living in plain sight too long. The infrastructure people trust until the day it fails. The reason I'm keeping this case in the sequence is that it still proves the same law. People keep underestimating stored energy because it looks calm right before it turns. Pressurized fuel containers, especially in residential or farm-style settings, are often treated like fixtures rather than as conditional systems requiring inspection, replacement, and strict separation from ignition risk. That normalization is its own kind of arrogance. Trevor Brown died in the blast radius of that normalization. He was there to save life. The system that should have been maintained before he ever arrived had already started deciding otherwise. Case 9. The Fireplace Teen. A house can become unlivable before anyone inside understands that the air has already changed sides. That is the nightmare at the center of this file. Berkeley McGuire was 14 years old when a home explosion in Oklahoma took her life in 2018. The reports that followed focused on the fireplace area and on propane involved in or around the ignition system. Investigators looked at the conditions inside the home, and what emerged was the sort of domestic hazard people always think belongs to someone else's address. Gas accumulates quietly. That is its special cruelty. A room can look normal, smell slightly off, or not at all, and still be moving toward disaster because the dangerous part is not visible. People continue doing household things, adjusting a lighter, reaching for a switch, trying a pilot, checking an appliance, while the actual atmosphere of the house has already become the weapon. By the time the ignition happened in this case, the conversation was over. The blast tore through the home, injuring other family members and killing Berkeley. The violence of explosions makes them feel sudden, but gas disasters are usually slow right up until the second they are not. Pressure builds, air changes, the fuel spreads. The family remains inside the ordinary rhythm of home life because nothing has yet announced itself loudly enough to stop them. That is why these incidents hurt so deeply. Nobody in the room is trying to be brave. They are trying to live in their own house. The danger arrives disguised as maintenance, inconvenience, smell, a burner issue, an appliance issue, a thing to check. Real quick, that final phrase has buried entire families. Berkeley's death remains one of those cases where the mechanical cause and the emotional wound are equally clear. A teenage girl died because combustible gas and ignition found each other in a space that should have been her safest one. This was preventable. That is the part that matters most. Gas systems require respect long before the flame appears. If something smells wrong, acts wrong, or refuses to light correctly, the first intelligent act is distance, not curiosity. Houses are not laboratories, and families are not supposed to become the test subjects of one more try. Berkeley did not die because anyone wanted to gamble. She died because too many domestic hazards begin by looking small enough to manage, right until the room itself explodes. Case 10. The aerial closure. By the time a bucket truck rises into position, most of the real risk has already been decided on the ground. What line is live? What clearance is safe? What branch can swing? What angle the boom can tolerate? What assumption everyone in the crew has silently agreed to trust? When one of those assumptions is wrong, the body in the bucket pays for all of them at once. Eric Rayna Wright was 31 when he was working in Exeter Township, Pennsylvania in 2026. He was in an elevated bucket performing tree work near energized lines. That sentence sounds technical and ordinary because utility-adjacent trimming happens every day all over the country. But the word ordinary is what gets people killed around electricity. It makes the room feel procedural instead of fatal. Reports said the bucket or boom came into contact with power infrastructure while he was up there. Once that happened, there was no useful second chance left. Elevated electrical contact is not just shock. It is isolation, entrapment, metal becoming conductor, height becoming accomplice, and rescue suddenly being delayed by the fact that anyone rushing in too quickly can become the second victim. People outside the trade often imagine electrocution as a simple event. Body touches line, body dies. In reality, the danger is geometric. Air gap, air, reach distance, tool length, limb position, machine angle. Every inch matters right up until the instant it doesn't. Then the whole arrangement collapses into one truth. The worker is inside a live path. What makes this case especially hard is that it almost certainly did not feel reckless from inside the job. Men in tree and line work build entire careers around working close to power while not touching it. Skill, planning, and repetition keep them alive. But repetition also breeds emotional calm, and emotional calm can start to feel like permission. Rayna Wright died at the scene after the contact. The reports that followed were clinical, but the body count inside a story like this is never purely mechanical. A man left for work, got in a bucket, trusted spacing and setup, and never came back down alive. The machine had only one duty: keep him positioned away from the thing that could kill him. The line had only one quality: it remained alive whether anyone respected it or not. Once those two realities met, the case was already closed. Case 11. The Gator Words. The warning came before the death. That matters? A lot of people tell these stories as if the animal appears out of nowhere and chaos does the rest. That is not what happened here. The danger was already present, already visible, and already spoken aloud. Tommy Woodward was 28 when he was at a marina area in Orange, Texas, in July 2015. People around him had already been talking about the alligator. The water was not some abstract wilderness nobody understood. This was a known situation with a known animal in it. That should have narrowed every smart choice available. Instead, it widened the stage for ego. At some point, after drinks and conversation and exactly the kind of summer night overconfidence that keeps showing up in fatal outdoor stories, Woodward moved towards the water. The alligator was not a rumor, it was part of the scene. And still, he treated the scene like something he could control. What people forget about alligators is that they do not need much. They do not need a dramatic chase. They need proximity, timing, and a body in the wrong place. Their violence is often shockingly efficient because their habitat already does half the work for them. Once a person enters the margin where land stops helping and water starts helping the animal, the balance changes instantly. Woodward was attacked and killed. Wildlife officers later destroyed the alligator believed to be involved. News coverage circled the same terrible point. There had been warnings. This was not a mystery in the dark. It was a man standing near a known predator and deciding that ordinary rules no longer applied to him in that moment. That is why the case endures. Not because alligators are exotic. They are not. In their territory, they are simply the local law. The stupidity lies in believing that familiarity with a place, a night, a dock, or a group of friends somehow lowers that law. The most haunting thing about this story is how quickly a sentence can turn into evidence. A person says some version of, "It'll be fine," see, or "I know what I'm doing," and within minutes, the room is gone, the dock is quiet, and the water has already taken the last word. Tommy Woodward did not die because no one saw the risk. He died because the risk was seen, named, and then overruled by confidence. Case 12. The Lawnmower Cliff. He had done it so many times that the slope had stopped feeling like a slope. That was the real danger. For years, Richard Crowe treated that stretch of property like part of his weekly rhythm. Cut the grass, ease along the edge, turn the mower, keep moving. Familiar ground becomes emotional anesthesia that way. A route repeated enough times stops feeling like a decision and starts feeling like muscle memory. You stop reading the earth in front of you because yesterday's version of the earth is still sitting in your head. On a summer night in Pickens County, South Carolina, that old confidence failed him. Richard Crowe, 68 years old and well known in the county through years of public service, was mowing near the edge of his property when the riding mower lost its hold and went over. Reports afterward said the drop was roughly 15 to 20 feet. The mower went first. He followed it down. That is the whole violence of this case. No dramatic stunt, no alcohol, no dare. No one trying to impress a crowd. Just a man doing a chore in a place that had become too familiar to fear correctly. People underestimate how often fatal accidents begin with ordinary repetition. The dangerous thing is not always the machine. Sometimes it is the history between the person and the machine. A mower on unknown ground makes people cautious. A mower on ground you know makes people automatic. And automatic is deadly near edges, embankments, drainage cuts, and dark patches of soft earth. Investigators later treated it for what it was: a fatal rollover on a property task that probably felt almost too ordinary to carry danger anymore. That is exactly why it did. The cruelest part is that nothing about the task looked dramatic enough to trigger alarm in the mind. Grass, wheels, a line he had likely driven countless times. But all it takes is one night where the soil is softer. The angle is slightly different, the light is worse, or the front wheel takes one bite less than the body expected. Then routine stops protecting you. Richard Crowe did not die because he did not know the ground. He died because he knew it so well that he stopped checking whether the ground still agreed with his memory. If one file stayed with you, keep it. That's cheaper than learning it firsthand. Blunder Vault stays open for people who'd rather borrow the lesson than become it.